Well, that was a movie.
Hello and welcome back to Simon's Rants. I'm Simon, and today I'm giving my first thoughts on The Fabelmans, which is the semi-autobiographical movie made by Steven Spielberg about his life. It was co-written by Spielberg himself as well as Tony Kushner. Spielberg doesn't typically write. He's only written something like 6 movies in his professional career. Typically he has another writer write for him and then he directs a story, but of course this being about his life essentially, he did some of the writing for this and then had his screenwriter help him write it. So if you're going into this and you're wondering, well, is this a true story or is it fiction? How much of it is based on his life? How much of it is actually accurate? From everything that I've researched and know about the movie, it is predominantly true. It is mostly accurate. The main reason he changed the names was he felt making a movie that is obviously about himself and his own life was borderline narcissistic, and he didn't want to come across as narcissistic, so he changed it and made it a fictional story, but all of the events are, for the most part, true. So I think it's kind of weird that he thought that, but I get it at the same time. I kind of wish it was just his story and then he didn't have to change names and stuff, but regardless, we're still getting, for the most part, an accurate representation of his life. I mean, every biopic changes things, even if they're not changing the name, so you could still argue that this is more accurate than 90% of biopics out there, even if the names are wrong. This movie has had a lot of attention from, cinephiles, film buffs, critics, people like that, and not really any attention at all from the average moviegoer, the average just fan. And that makes sense to me. Even before I saw it, I kind of was like, I get why that would be the case, but now definitely after having seen it, it makes total sense. This movie is made by Spielberg for Spielberg. I've heard it said before, and it's very true, that as an artist, you have to create art for yourself as a primary audience. You want to make movies that you want to see, not movies you think other people will want to see. You're making it for an audience of one that is you, and then other people liking it is a happy byproduct of that if you're a good filmmaker, a good artist in general. And that's what Spielberg did for this, was he wasn't trying to make something that he thought people would see. He made something that was extremely deeply personal to him. So there are some drawbacks to that, in that a lot of people who aren't into filmmaking or art in general will be bored to tears by this movie or won't understand it, won't relate to it, and so won't care. But if you are a filmmaker, if you are into creating art of any sort, or you're just into film history, you will really enjoy this movie for that, because there's so many things that are so relatable. Just the process of him seeing his first movie in the theaters for the first time, him starting to make his own home videos, him having to deal with non-actors and trying to direct them, and all these things to me were so relatable, because that's something that, I have lived out. Obviously, it's a very different era, very different time. He was doing literal cut, copy, and pasting with film, making movies on film. And I never did that, my whole life it's been digital, but there's still elements of that I'm like, man, I really relate to that. And you laugh when you see things like him coming up with special ways to get around the lack of budget and lack of special effects. Like, he poked holes into the film for gunshots in his movies so that there would be a bright flash of light when gunshots went off, and you had people holding water balloons filled with fake blood, so when they got shot they would smack their chest and it would burst out. And then they had kind of these seesaws with a wooden plank on a rock with dirt on top of it, so when you stepped on it then dirt would go flying in the air. And it was just it was so imaginative and it was so fun, and it really reminded me of myself as a kid, making stop motion videos with my Legos and using the food coloring dye that we would use to dye eggs for Easter, using that to make blood for my Lego figures and stuff. So if you had a childhood like that, then this movie I think will mean a lot more to you than, the average person that did do something like that. But that's not a bad thing. I don't think every movie is intended to have everyone as an audience. For instance, Spielberg's last movie was West Side Story, the remake, which I didn't see because I knew this isn't for me. I'm not even a big fan of the original. I have no interest in seeing a remake, but for whatever reason, Spielberg wanted to make that movie, and that movie was for him. And a lot of people wanted to see it too. Not as many people as some would have hoped. Like, it didn't make a whole lot of money, but it had an audience. Primarily, that audience was Spielberg, and I'm just glad to see him making movies out of passion. You know, a while ago, after they made Indiana Jones 4, Shia LaBeouf had a quote that kind of got out there where he was like, he was disappointed working for Spielberg because he said, I grew up with him being my hero, and when I finally got to work with him, I realized he wasn't a man anymore, he was just an industry. You know, everything that he was doing, everything Spielberg was making wasn't a passion project anymore, it was just part of the machine, just this Hollywood machine that a lot of filmmakers become eventually when they get beat to a pulp and ground down. They're no longer these artists with visions, they're just, you know, trying to pump out something that will be acceptable and something that will be popular. And that's how I felt about Spielberg for a while. I haven't been a fan of most of his recent movies. This one felt different. It felt a lot like old school Spielberg. There were still things about it that I didn't love, but that's always been the case with Spielberg for me, because he's always been very schmaltzy, very cheesy with like how actors act and, you know, the shot designs and stuff. But that's also part of the fun. You know, everybody's overacting a little bit. There's just a little bit of cheese to everything. Everything's just a little bit, you know, goody two-shoes. And so that's how this movie is as well. And yes, it's his true story. It's based on his life, but he's going to portray it in the way that he saw it, because he's Spielberg. So why would you want Spielberg to show you anything other than him? And especially when it's a movie about his life. So I mean, like, you've got the cheesiest bullies put to film, and you've got a very cheesy interpretation of a lot of events happening, but there's still the moments that make you sit back in awe of the absolute visionary that Spielberg is and always has been. And, you know, plenty of moments that bring tears to your eyes effortlessly, whether it's, you know, the emotional moments of him first discovering how to use a camera and make something, or emotional moments between him and his family or stuff like that. There's very good dynamics between all of the cast in this movie, even when people are, you know, overacting and being a little bit cheesy. So I don't want to say that this movie's perfect, and like I said, there's obviously a limited audience for it, but I feel like if you're in that demographic, if you're part of the group that will relate to this movie, you will absolutely love it. And I did enjoy it a lot. And he has mentioned recently that he's like, if there's any story that I want to be remembered for, it's this one. And I've heard some people be like, well, isn't that narcissistic? You know, when I was saying like he changed names, because isn't that narcissistic to put the focus on yourself and tell your own story? But if you ask me, as a artist, as a creator, every story we tell because it's personal. It's about us. Even if it's not, it is. You know, you could sit back and go, well, how is Jurassic Park about Spielberg? I'm sure in some way it is. I'm not Spielberg. I don't know the guy. But every story that I tell because there's a reflection of me in there. And I think the more personal the art gets, the more meaningful it is, obviously to the artist, but to anybody that can observe it. And maybe you won't get it, maybe you can't relate to it, but that doesn't mean that it's not powerful in its own way. So for this to be the most important piece that Spielberg believes he's ever made is totally understandable to me, because it's the most personal thing he's ever done and ever can do. It's his own story. So I don't believe it's narcissistic at all. I don't believe it's anything beyond what art always has been and always should be. It's a reflection. It's an artistic interpretation of what you have, because as an artist, what can you create other than what you already have to give, which is you know, your own life, your own feelings, your own emotions, your own reflection of the world around you. So that's what this is, through and through, is just Spielberg took in the things that happened to him in his life and gave it back. And yeah, I mean, sure, it's a Spielberg lens on it, but that's what you want. If Nolan was making a movie about his life, or if Kubrick was making a movie about his life, there would be their own tropes in it, but that's because you see your own life through your own lens. And it's not a dishonest interpretation, it is just how you view and how you process things. So there's gonna be cheesy moments. It's a Spielberg movie. He's a cheesy guy. He loves a little bit of the schmaltz. He loves a little bit of the goody two-shoes vibe. And even, you know, you've seen it even in his horror movies. Like, you get to his most horrifying movies like Jaws and Jurassic Park and Poltergeist and stuff like that. There's still an element of cheese in there. So of course, when you've got a drama like this, there's going to be that cheese there. And if you love Spielberg, you don't care, you know, because, or in fact, you do care because you like it and you're happy that it's there. So I know I just said this in the last movie I reviewed, but it's like, I don't know that it's fair to give it a rating, like a number rating, because it is what it is. It's just a meaningful story being told, and some people will get it and some people won't. Some people will relate and some people won't care. And that's art. You know, art is subjective. And I know as a critic, I spend my whole career trying to objectify art, but sometimes you kind of just have to shrug your shoulders and say it's subjective. And, you know, one man's treasures is another man's trash. And in this case, like this movie, there was a decent amount of people at this movie. There was more people here than at the Whale, but, you know, it's not going to be a high earning movie because most people won't care about this. But it doesn't mean it doesn't matter, you know? And this is the most personal work Spielberg could have possibly made, and it's great for that. I could get into spoilers, I could get into the plot. I don't think it's really necessary because it's Spielberg's life, you know? And there's a lot of great, emotional, powerful moments in there. There's a lot of really interesting tidbits. It's fun at times, it's slow at times, it's sweet, it's bitter, it's everything. It's just life on display. So I wholeheartedly recommend it if that sounds like something you'd be interested in, but I totally understand if it's not. If you go to movies to be entertained, because it's, you know, fast, it's exciting, it's romantic, it's bigger than life, then this isn't for you, because this very much isn't bigger than life. It is simply life, and that's what it is. So I enjoyed it a lot. Might not be for you. Let me know in the comments below if you've seen it and what you thought of it. Thanks for watching, guys. Bye.